let's go to the Pope. Let's play this clip that we've got of the Pope talking about Muslim terrorism being a myth. And the first part of this is in Italian, so I need to read the subtitles to you. And I think I'm going to use my Father Guido Sarducci, my worst impression of Father Guido Sarducci from Saturday Night Live when I do this, because I want you to know that it's his words and not mine. And I want to emphasize the fact that when the Pope starts talking about politics or science, he is speaking ex cathedra. He doesn't have the authority of the church, and Catholics understand what that means. In fact, when the Pope speaks on politics and science, he himself is mocking his office, in my opinion, and he is opening himself up not only for criticism, but for outright ridicule. So let's play this video of the Pope explaining to us how Muslim terrorism is really simply a myth.
Muchos piensan distinto.
Many think differently, feel differently, seeking a God for meeting God in their different ways. Into this crowd, into this range of religions, there is only one certainty we have for all. There is the fact that we are all the children of a God.
The Holy Father said today, notwithstanding new developments and the emergence of situations which are at times painful and even tragic, migration is still an aspiration to hope. The Pope noted that migration offers benefits both to the receiving nations and to the nations from which migrants come.
There's some of those benefits. The blessings of multiculturalism right there.
Pastoral workers play an important role through initiating dialogue, welcoming and assisting with legal issues, mediating with the local population. More than this, the church is a source of hope for migrants, who often experience disappointment, distress, and loneliness, and therefore everyone is worthy of being welcomed and supported.
He describes migration as a phenomenon, quote, which demands to be understood and confronted with sensitivity and a sense of justice.
And we say the B-roll for those of you listening. We're watching people smashing, rioting,
while observing the law.
Beating people.
Pope recalled that the attacks in Brussels were committed by young people born in Europe, but who'd not been integrated in society. He also recalled that
largely their parents'
Swedes
fault.
Is an immigrant or the son of immigrants, but they are perfectly integrated.
There were immigrants to blame for this riot in Stockholm. There is an increased level of crime. Assaults are up, rapes are up. This is just according to police statistics in Sweden.
Pope Francis is undoubtedly one of the biggest con men, one of the biggest frauds, one of the biggest liars in all of world history. He came out last year and said that it makes him basically nauseous to hear that Europe has Christian roots and shouldn't open itself up to the most radical, barbarous groups flooding out of the collapsing Middle East and North Africa. He's promoted a one-world religion. He has attacked America's sovereignty and warned us that we shouldn't elect President Donald J. Trump. And now he's come out in a public statement and said, Islamic terrorism does not exist. Merkel, the embattled Chancellor of Germany, has also come out in the same weekend, just last weekend, and said it doesn't exist and we need, quote, more Muslim refugees. Yeah, a bunch of military-age men pouring into the country. Here's the article. It's up on Infowars.com. It links directly to Pope Francis's own statements released by the Vatican. Pope Francis declares Muslim terrorism, this is a quote, Muslim terrorism does not exist, close quote, as he continues to set the stage for a one-world religion. What in the world is he thinking? Michael Schneider writing says, when I first started seeing headlines that claim Pope Francis said that Muslim terrorism does not exist, I thought that couldn't possibly be true. After all, who could possibly deny that Islamic radicals are engaged in terrorism? In the last 30 days, there have been 127 Islamic terror attacks in a total of 25 nations. And in 2016, global terror attacks set an all-time record high, were up 25% from the year before. And he goes through Christians being slaughtered, the UN admitting there's an epidemic of it, what happened in Libya, Syria, with hundreds of thousands of Christians being killed or displaced. And Pope Francis sits there arrogantly saying it doesn't exist. Just like we don't see people in New York yesterday at a women's march doing the call to prayer, or women putting on hijabs in D.C. or Berlin, or just like we don't see all these weird, bizarre Islamic groups actually leading the protest and demonstrations. No, we know the left and the globalists have allied themselves in an unholy alliance with Islam, Wahhabist, Sunni Islam out of Saudi Arabia, and that they are the destabilization force that is supposedly going to, quote, repopulate Europe. So the globalists take over Europe and the U.S., teach us not to have kids, then destabilize the Middle East, open up the borders, and bring in the most oppressive anti-family, anti-woman, anti-Christian groups you can imagine, who dress their little kids up with suicide bombs and have them march in and blow up Christian churches. It's unbelievable. This Pope, say what you want about Catholics in the past, but this Pope used blackmail dealing with pedophilia in the Vatican to overtake it and overthrow the church and bring their system in. And the good news is, not just conservative Catholics, but Catholics across the board are almost unanimously in leadership opposing him because he is a monster meant to destroy one of the oldest Christian institutions in the world. The West is on its deathbed. The globalists want it to fall before they bring in their technotronic global tyranny. And instead of the West falling, it's time for parasites like Pope Francis to fall politically, where everyone completely recognizes what a monster he is. They say the devil is the father of lies. Well, I ask you, is it true that Islamic terror does not exist? Is the Pope telling you the truth? Or is the Pope lying to you? And clearly he's lying, not just here, but in many other ways. He believes you will take his office, speaking ex cathedra, and will then accept a great delusion like Revelations talks about and a great lie, all because the father or the pontiff told you so. Well, he is a father. He's a father of lies. And he's a son of Baphomet by any measurement.
Now, I want to continue with what Alex Jones was just talking about in that report about the Pope. And let's talk about immigrant rights. Let's talk about refugee rights. What about the people who came here as people who are really being oppressed? We have a story from WND. Frightened Christians lose a battle over a U.S. mega mosque. And this is in Sterling Heights, Michigan. And these are Iraqi Christians, some of whom came here in 1989. And one of the women there, her great-grandfather was crucified by Muslims in Iraq because he refused to remove the large gold cross he wore around his neck. And so they came here when she was 6 years old to escape that kind of persecution. So they had about 200 people show up at the city council. This is a community of about 50,000 people, Chaldean and Assyrian Christians who have now moved to that area. But they're going to put a mega mosque there. And they said, we would rather not have this repeated, this pattern of persecution repeated. We're going to tell you more about this when we come back from the break because I don't have enough time to go into this in detail. But this is what we're talking about, folks. We have seen this kind of terrorism, which is what Donald Trump said, and they mocked him, even as the riots were happening in Sweden. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. We're going to be joined in the next segment by James Wesley Rawls, and he's going to go over with you, among other things, he's going to tell you how to securely transmit information. We've got some things that we're going to show you here, ordinary things that you can get, nothing very special, but he's going to explain it to people who technically are maybe not into this. You know, it's very simple stuff, SD cards and thumb drives and that type of thing, a way to communicate securely. We have an example of a guy in Denmark who's now going to be charged, first time that they've charged anybody in 46 years for blasphemy. And again, that's it's amazing that Denmark would have that kind of law on the books. But still, this is also a case, they're coming after him because he burned a Quran as a matter of free speech. And he did this over a year ago. And so as I pointed out before, if you don't do the kinds of things we're going to be talking about with James Wesley Rawls, you are creating an audit trail for them to come after you in the future for future crimes. Or when they decide that something that's been on the books like they did in Denmark and not used for a very long time, they're now going to start persecuting that. And I say persecuting deliberately. I know it's a prosecution, but it is a persecution, folks. I was just talking before we went to break about these Christians in Michigan who lost their battle against a mega mosque. Now, this is an area that was zoned residential. And who were the residents? These were people, 50,000 people living in this area, Chaldean and Assyrian Christians who moved to this area of Michigan to escape Islamic persecution. And I talked about one of the people who was head of the group who spoke there briefly. The mayor was cutting everybody off when they would get up and talk. They had about 200 people show up to city council. They said it didn't matter that Donald Trump's president or Jeff Sessions, the new attorney general. They lost, the Muslims won. Every time they would get up, they said the mayor would shut them down as soon as they started talking about how they had been persecuted where they came from. They did not want to see this coming into this area. So it was a concern not only about the zoning issues, but it was also something that they did not want to have set up there. Like if it was a Jewish community and they had a Ku Klux Klan headquarters that was going to be built right smack dab in their community. That's the way these people feel because, as I pointed out, her great-grandfather was crucified by the Muslims because he refused to take off a gold chain. And I think there's a lesson in that we need to understand what the word martyr means. That was a Greek word that simply meant witness. The first martyrs were people who were Christian witnesses, who had been eyewitnesses to what had happened with Jesus Christ and with the apostles and others, and they refused, under pain of death by the Romans, to recant what they knew. They would not deny what they believed. Muslims took that, and they said, well, we're going to call people who are suicide murderers, suicide bombers, who kill other people, not who die because they will not renounce their faith, but people who kill and then get killed because people, they can't get people to acquiesce to their faith. You understand the difference? You understand how they twisted that, how they perverted that? That's what they mean when they say martyr. And so they take the language just like liberals. I mean, they got a lot of things in common. The Democrats truly are a cult of death. I mean, when we look at this and we say, how could the party that panders to the LGBT crowd, panders to women and so forth, and says, you know, that's how they are carving out their demographic, all these different groups. These groups are oppressed in Islamic countries far worse than they are anywhere else in the world, and yet they also make Islam part of their groups. Do you see that fundamental problem there, that cognitive dissonance? Well, they don't. And actually, there's a good reason, because they're both a cult of death. The Democrats worship abortion. They say, let's be proud of it. Let's put this out there. And of course, so do the Muslims. Stay with us. We'll be right back with James Wesley Rawls.
Look, I'm not going to sit here and say, see, I told you so, that communist Chinese-style net censorship was coming to the web, because it's already here. It's being announced. The way you keep the internet open and free is you get involved more than ever. Go to Infowars.com/app. A new battleship in the fight. Infowars Live, available right now. We're looking for a crew to man it. You gonna sit down and play games and be a trendy? Or are you gonna be part of history? Don't sit by and let the internet and free speech be stolen from you. Take action.